Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Goodrich. Oh, thank you, thank you, Chuck. Yeah. And thank you, lovely judges and lovely panelists. Thank you all for being here for the penultimate portion of the 2025 Edgar Week Symposium. It's a delight to once again, at long last, meet in person. If the pandemic taught us anything, it's to cherish such occasions. Ars longa, vita brevis, carpe diem, and welcome. Today's topic, how writers research and borrow from reality, is one of great interest to me as a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. We have distinguished practitioners from both sides of the field with us today, and once I've introduced them to you, we'll get the conversation underway. In the very strictest alphabetical order, allow me to present Kimberly Belle, author of The Paris Widow, Rees Bowen, author of The Rose Arbor, Tietjen, author of Frank Figliuzzi, author of The Long Haul, Tietjen, author of Death in the Details, and Michael Wolraich, author of The Bishop and the Butterfly. Congratulations on your various nominations, and thank you as well for joining us. When I think of research, I often think of it as something that one does in a library or archives in some university. But with the increasing amount of material that's been digitized and is now available online, let me begin by asking you all if, in your experience, the internet helps or hinders your research, and how you did your research for the particular titles we're discussing today. Rees, would you like to start?
Why is it always me? The internet, I think, is a big caveat. It's great when you want to just look at sort of general facts, but I've found people put wrong things get onto the internet, and they got put from one site to another. I can tell you one occasion when the internet was absolutely brilliant. I had written a book called The Tuscan Child, and I'd set it in a small hill town in Tuscany. And when the copy editor, who was in England, was going through this, he emailed me and said, I think you should know that the town where you set that was actually liberated 3 weeks earlier than that by the Germans. So I think you should make it 3 weeks earlier. So obviously the town, it was all about a man freezing to death over Christmas, so I didn't want to make it earlier. So I thought, okay, I've got to move it a little bit further north. But I wasn't in Tuscany at the time. So I know Tuscany well, luckily, but I spent 3 days on Google Earth going, okay, if I go up this valley, will I see a vineyard on one side and olive trees on the other? No? Okay. So the next valley, I did this for 3 days until I found the exact right place I could put this village. And so thank you to Google Earth. So there are, and also for small things I've found. When I was first, I was writing a book, and there was someone in the early 20th century who's tailing somebody and making notes, and I thought, what does she write with? Obviously she can't carry a pen and an inkwell around with her and dip in, so what did they do in that? So that's where it's great to look up small things on the internet like that. It saves you. I really miss my friendly librarians, though, who were wonderful. You'd go and ask them a ridiculous question, and they'd find the answer to it.
Frank?
I think, the answer to the question, is the internet a blessing or a curse for research, is yes. It's both. Yeah. Because even increasingly today, I'm seeing some pretty sloppy circular reporting. So if something's wrong, it gets repeated 1,000 times in different platforms. And it really behooves an author to get down to brass tacks. For my book, Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, there was no substitute for me hitting the field and getting out there. And it's what I did for 25 years as an FBI special agent, and it came natural to me. I rode over 2,000 miles in a big rig to learn the culture of long-haul trucking. I talked with street-level victims who had been sex trafficked victims who had been trafficked to truckers and survived violent encounters. And then, even then, I found that I had to, in an effort to get it right, run what I wrote by the experts for fact-checking. And often they said, you didn't hear that correctly, or I didn't say that. And so you've got to get that right. But I see the internet as nothing more than a starting point, and relying on it for anything more than that is fraught with peril.
Katie?
Well, Reese, I'm happy to tell you I am a friendly librarian. So that's my day job. I'm a high school librarian. And so research for me takes many it looks many different ways. The internet for sure can be helpful. One thing that actually is sort of a fun adventure for me when I'm researching is sometimes I end up falling down these rabbit holes that I didn't like mean to fall down. And so, for example, I have no idea how I landed on this. I was not looking for this information, but somehow I came across the fact that Kraft macaroni and cheese became a thing right around 1946 when my novel Death in the Details is set. And so I ended up working in macaroni and cheese throughout my novel in various ways, mostly as a source of levity because there's a lot of dark things that are happening in my story. And in fact, my protagonist even ended up naming her cat after Kraft macaroni and cheese. So I think for me, sometimes you don't know what adventure the internet might take you on, and in my case, happily at that time, it was a good one.
Did you find the nutshells, and you could maybe explain what those are, via the internet?
Oh, sure. Actually, I found out about the nutshells from NPR. And so my protagonist, Maple, is based on a real woman. Forensic science. Among other things, she was the first female police captain in the United States. What I found particularly intriguing about her at the time was that she built these miniature recreations of death scenes and used them in order to train investigators. And so I heard this story on NPR. Actually, I saw it on NPR's website, come to think of it, so technically it was the internet. And I found out that they were going to be on a rare display at the Smithsonian. And so this plays into what Frank was saying about going and seeing the thing and doing the thing. I wasn't hunting a serial killer, but I was looking at these intricate recreations, almost like some people refer to them as death dollhouses, although I feel like Frances Glessner Lee would not like that term personally, but it does kind of get across the idea. And trying to sort of put together what might have happened in this situation with all this minute detail, recreating the moment that investigators would walk in and find this body, and sort of trying to figure out what would I do next. And so there's a lot of information available on the internet for sure, and there's also some really great nonfiction books on that topic too.
Michael?
I think writing the same book would have taken me 3-4 times longer without the internet. It's not so much Googling and finding websites, but all the newspapers and books that are digitized now, it's so much easier to access than going down and pulling out the microfilm and finding the date, but not just reading them, but searching them, right? Doing keyword searches to find, all the articles related, say,
Tell us a bit about
topic.
the subject and why the digitized world would come in so handy, because you have dealt with a massive amount of information to synthesize it and put it together. So
my book is part true crime, part history. So for a lot of the true crime, my best source was newspapers. And there are so many newspapers now that are digitized. So, I was writing about this woman, Vivian Gordon, who was murdered in 1931. She was caught up in the anti-corruption investigation that Governor FDR initiated to investigate the Tammany Hall's corruption. The New York papers were full of stories with rich detail. And, I was able to not just go through one or two, but anything that was digitized, I could, through an easy keyword search, bring up, articles about Tammany Hall at this time, about the murder case. But even some of the background research about, there are obscure books about FDR that, if I'd gone to the library and picked up the books, I probably would not have grabbed this book. But, because through digital search, found, really interesting references about FDR, but in the context of this case. I will say that my book, I was finishing up my book about the time that ChatGPT came out. So out of curiosity, I asked ChatGPT who Vivian Gordon was, and ChatGPT recognized that she was a sex worker who was murdered. But the details keep wrong. It was 30 years later, murdered by somebody else entirely. So that means true. Kimberly?
I'm also a big fan of Duel on the internet. For most of my books, instead of the character, I did full-time research, like stupid or with theory, raffle, so you can go down. But I learned quickly on this, it's kind of with blood antiquity that, people were taking these artifacts, or historical artifacts, they're just them, they'll pop in word form, and they're just non-spacing out with orders and selling them in nice theater, and hopefully the buyers who legit that about their museums, their private collectors, so they kind of looking at a way their own historical, these central world history. So there's so much out there that I know was the lives world that everyone wants to know about. So I think Trudeau is a really great starting point. You do have to be careful not to after it's screwed. And there's so much you have to even look at for sake. Anyway, I don't have any close background. I fight. So, it's hard. But, dude,
Very useful, let us say that. If I remember correctly, H.R.F. Keating, among other writers, H.R.F. Keating wrote a number of novels set in India with his Detective Inspector Goti, long before he ever set foot in India. How important, I don't know you could get by with that today, but how important is it to go to the place you're writing about? Kimberly, you want to start with that? We'll work down the line.
My book's set in Paris, so I think it's very important to actually go there.
Extensive research is needed, I think, right? Yeah.
Like months and months. But I do like to anchor my story with real life details, and Paris is one of those places you don't have to give tons of description of the locations. Everybody knows what the Eiffel Tower looks like, but I set a scene under the Eiffel Tower when it's twinkling at night, and I wanted to stand there and, kind of feel how bright is it? Like, do you need sunglasses? So I did go there. I did get to, wander the streets and kind of get a feel for the place and the people and the crowds, and then I used some of those favorite places in my book.
Yeah, I agree totally. I go to every place where I'm going to. I have to start with a place I already know, and then I go back to it just to observe what I want for the book. And you'll notice, like Kimberly, my books are set in Tuscany, Venice, the south of France. There are no books set in Cleveland. But I go. Once I know what I want, I go there and then I just sit and I observe. And then, for example, in Venice, I would walk from A to B saying, what do you see from this bridge? What can you hear here? And all those little details. Because when you're writing, you can describe, she came down the Seine and saw the Eiffel Tower. Everybody can do that. It's if you find one tiny little thing about a place, you can really bring it to life. I know my friend Cara Black, who writes a series set in Paris. She was walking through the garment district and she saw bolts of cloth being put on a chute going down to a basement. And she thought, could a person get away down that chute if they needed to in a hurry? So she goes to sit on it and someone comes running up going, no, madame, ce n'est pas pour les personnes, But the thing is, you see something like that you could never invent. It's just these little gifts that you get given when you are in a place, and you have to always be open to those. So yeah, I have to go everywhere.
You're using London in '68 in the book as one of the two time zones.
Yeah.
Did you, you must know London very well, did you go to London especially for this?
I go to London every year, so I'm there anyway. We have a club we stay at in London. And the interesting thing is, London in 1968, that was me. I was walking around with my Mary Quant and so a lot of that is very fond memories of my own. And I actually observed, as you know in the book, there's this transition from the sort of the Beatles clean-cut era, moving to the hippies and the protest and all of that. I actually knew people who moved to a squat. They found an abandoned building and slept on mattresses on the floor. So I have very vivid memories of that. So
it's also interesting how much of World War II England survived into the 70s, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Marianne Faithfull remembers being a drug addict and
Yeah.
living on, waiting for the drug dealer to come up to her while she's sitting on rubble from a V2 Schneider bomb that was still there.
Yeah,
that kind of
I
thing.
mean, there were bomb sites
Yeah.
all over England way into the 70s, yeah. I mean, that was a normal thing in London, to see a bomb site on a
We tend to
corner.
think of time zones as completely disparate, but they interweave.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
and I think it was very much in the British psyche until quite recently,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
I mean, my husband's one of the last generation who remembers. He was
Mm.
old enough as a child to remember World War II, and I think he's never forgotten it. He's still, when 9/11 came, he sort of said, well, we were bombed for 5 years,
Yeah.
you know.
No, it's, my uncles were the same way.
Yeah.
They fought in World War II, and
Yeah.
that was that
Yeah.
era defined them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, Frank, you have to do your research on the ground, don't you? I mean, you have to go where you're writing about.
Well, clearly, I need to upgrade my locales. But
Tuscany serial
serial
killers,
killer
yeah.
truckers are not found a lot in Tuscany.
No.
Yeah, here's what I found. Because there's common trucking routes across the United States, my decision to actually ride a couple of thousand miles led to some incredible coincidences, really, with the various victims and truckers in my book. And so that meant I literally found myself in places and truck stops where a victim featured in my book had been murdered. I did not plan for that. It was literally a shock for me to realize, am I at the same place? This happened a couple of times, including in Nashville, where toward the end of my book, I stop for a shower at a truck stop and realize I am showering at a place where a woman had been killed, stuffed in a dumpster at that truck stop, and the trucker had subsequently been arrested for that murder at that very same Nashville truck stop. Similarly, up in the Upper Peninsula, a woman a victim I featured in the book, had been trafficked there, and that was only happenstance that I realized I was at the same place. So there's really no substitute. I think that, your question, how important is it to get out there and be at those places? Look, ideally, you're there. Now, I think there's a direct correlation between how significant that locale is to your story and whether you need to be there. And I think if it's significant, obviously, the details become important. And you lose street cred if you get it wrong. What you don't want are people, and boy, is this annoying but helpful also, is, Frank, that place isn't there anymore. And I'm like, okay. So in fact, right after the book was published, that Nashville truck stop closed. So I did have people saying, well, that's not there anymore. Well, it was there 2 weeks ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, somebody said to me once, you can get anything wrong except trains and guns.
Yes.
Oh, Ian Fleming got tons of letters from people about the Walther PPK and all that stuff, and that was the incorrect gun. He had a long correspondence with a gun manufacturer, actually, that arose out of that kind of, catch up, Ian. No. Going for a long time. Katie?
Well, yeah, this is my debut novel, so clearly I'm going to learn from my my peers up here as well, because I set my story in a fictional town in Vermont. So I can't go there, but I did name it after my aunt's farm in rural Vermont, which is named Elderberry Farm, so I named my town Elderberry. And I did, however, go visit several places associated with Frances Glessner Lee, the inspiration for my character. She was an heiress in Chicago. She grew up on Prairie Avenue, and her dad started International Harvester. So that is now a museum. It's called Glessner House Museum. And I may or may not have corrected the tour guide more than once. I don't know. They talk about all the members of the family, but to me, there's clearly one very, very most interesting member of that family. And then I've also visited her. Her family had a summer home in New Hampshire, and my husband was a good enough sport to go there on a weekend with me a couple of years ago. So I've gotten to be in two places that were very important to Frances Glessner Lee, and that really helped me. It helped me feel a different kind of connection, I think, with her. Even though my book isn't literally about her, my character shares a lot of characteristics with her.
Michael?
My book's set in New York, where I've lived for the past 25 years, so I didn't get to go to any exotic destinations further than Brooklyn. Nor did, not only going to New York, but living in New York, protect me from making some of those errors. I got the Union Club relative to the Metropolitan Club in the wrong place, and mixed up Mushaloo Parkway and Mushaloo Boulevard. So can still make mistakes. Fortunately, those were the only 2 mistakes, as far as I know, in the book, and have been since corrected in the paperback. I do wish I had a time machine to go back to New York in the 1920s, which, it was just immersing myself in this era was really a fascinating experience for me, and all the changes that have taken place. Upper West Side, which is probably one of the bougiest areas of New York right now, was a hotbed of gangsters and brothels. There's a library now, very lovely library, the Jefferson Market Library in the West Village, not far from here. Used to be a notorious courthouse. It was the women's court, where they would, all the sex workers would get arrested, and they'd be paraded through there, and people would come men would come and ogle them at the in the seat. So I actually did my first event at that library, so I could sort of point to where Vivian Gordon had been first arrested and convicted.
Was her footprint, or the footprint of her world, still visible in places? Could you find, had everything in Manhattan and the Bronx altered too greatly, or could you still get the scent of that world?
It depends. Certain things, like the courthouse, the Supreme Court courthouse in Foley Square, that was a big part, various scenes in the book were there, and that's unchanged, essentially. But the real, the life stuff, the brothels and the restaurants. There was a tea house, where the conspirators met near Times Square. Like, all that, of course, is not there anymore. So all you have is like the bare ground. Even the Van Cortlandt Park, where the body was found, it's, the roads have been kind of rerouted, so it's not the same as it once was.
Frank, here's a question for you. How do you verify your sources? How do you make sure that, we're talking about the vetting of material, and making sure everything is correct, not just geographically, but in terms of fact and interpretation. What's the process for you for that?
Well, this got particularly challenging and dicey when it came to victims of sex trafficking that I featured in the book. I obviously had to use a great deal of sensitivity to their tragic stories and the traumas they've experienced, and wanted to accept in whole their accounts of their lives, and they deserve that respect. When it was time for the publisher to help me vet certain stories and really keep me out of trouble, because literally these victims in many cases are describing people, sometimes prominent people, who have committed crimes against them, and including molestation at young ages. So when you go back to a victim and try to vet, piecemeal, hey, tell me this person's name again, I want to try and at least locate them. This causes great consternation. And so it's a real challenge. And it caused me, in at least the story of one victim, to greatly scale down the story, not because we did not believe her. In fact, I believed her 100%. But rather because of I did not want to re-traumatize her by forcing her to give me minute details, and we didn't want to get sued. So you vet as well as you can. You work closely with your publisher's general counsel's office, and you end up, putting this forward. And you come up with a good waiver and statement for people to sign, which I did. Everybody signed something for my book that says, I'm telling you the truth, and I'm not going to sue you. But even then, that's not enough if, there's an integrity issue there that surpasses the legal document.
Yeah. Have you heard, have people you've spoken to and interviewed for the book, read the book and contacted you?
Yes, so nobody is sideways with me. I got it right.
Good.
For them, and respected them as well. And in fact, people have agreed to participate in any kind of subsequent publications and interviews and that kind of thing.
Any response from family members, or are there any connections to the Vivian Gordon case, Michael? And I mean, it's about 100 years ago now since it happened, isn't it? Or almost 1931. So, are there any survivors? Were there anyone to talk to? Is it all just public records, or how did you?
So the main characters did not have surviving descendants. Samuel Seabury, who's the bishop in the title, did not have any children. I won't give away what happened to Vivian Gordon's child. I did get a funny message after the book came out from a physicist at Harvard who told me that one of the villains in the book was her great-grandfather. Actually, it was her grandfather. And she'd grown up not knowing anything about, his notorious role in this case. And the kids discovered in their grandmother's attic at some point, like a suitcase full of newspaper clippings. And so she was actually contacting me she didn't have information for me. She wanted to find out, what else I could tell her about her grandfather, whom she had never known because he'd become estranged from the family by the time she was there. So that was definitely interesting. But no, unfortunately, I didn't have anyone closer to talk to about the case.
Katie, has anyone from the family, the actual family that you based the Nutshell world on, have any of them contacted you or been in contact with you?
Not so far, but I would love to chat with them. No, I have, like I said, I visited Glessner House, and I've gotten to know the director there a little bit, and so he and I have gone back and forth a little bit. I'm going to be in Chicago again this summer, and I hope to be able to go through some of her papers and things like that. He had told me I could do that next time I was around, and luckily I have a cousin in Chicago, so that works out. I do have a more lighthearted example, since people were sharing, fact-checking and just little details that got, and ironically, my book is called Death in the Details. On page 12, keep in mind, this is, page 12, it haunts my dreams. This is 1946. The sheriff, I needed him to say something vaguely sexist and dismissive to my main character, so I had him say, "Don't get your pantyhose in a twist." Well, guess what? Most of you already know. There were no pantyhose in 1946. Many, many, many people have shared this with me. Some more politely than others. One lady, I'm very disturbed. I'm very concerned about her because it appears that it ruined her entire life. Like you said, you were able to fix something for your paperback. So happily, the paperback on page 12 does not use the word pantyhose. But that was a good lesson, a humbling lesson for me. And as hard as you try to get the details right, I wasn't around in 1946. I think I got a lot of things right, but it's you're never going to be 100%. And I had to get over it and luckily correct it for the paperback.
Thank goodness for paperbacks. 1959.
Yep. Oh, I know.
Yeah, I'm sure. It did catch my eye, I must say, in an otherwise really beautifully evoked post-war New England world.
Oh, thank you.
Reese, have you been caught out in any sort of things like that, or?
The one I'm ashamed to admit actually didn't go through into the book, but one of my Royal Spinus books was about finding an Iron Age fort in Ireland, and I had one character say to the other, this is 1936, say to the other, "The satellite images show," and of course, when I read through it again, I did go, oops. So luckily, I have myself and beta readers before it ever gets to anybody else. But no, the annoying things, as Robert was saying, was a place you think you know, that's where you make mistakes. In one of my early Royal Spinus books, I have her go to Claridge's Hotel, and I put it on the wrong street. And the worst thing about that was, A, I lived in London for a long while, and B, my parents lived next door to the night manager of Claridge's Hotel, so I never lived that one down. And the other one was in one of the Royal Spinist books. I had her walking up Constitution Hill to go to Buckingham Palace. Next time I was in London, I walked past and I went, you walk down Constitution Hill to Buckingham Palace. So, that's it. Things you think you know very well, that's where you slip up. And so now I do double check myself, and, I get other people to double check it too.
Kimberly, any slips, any notes, anything?
Well, in this particular book, I had a lot of French, and I am not a native French speaker. I did run it by multiple native French speakers, and they all had different answers. And they said to me, ask 3 different French people, and they will tell you 3 different ways to say something. So, I have gotten emails, and, copy editors have saved me here and there, but there are still things in there that people will email me about, so.
You can
And-
come back and say, don't pee.
Yeah, it's,
Here's a question for all of you, and I think this applies to fiction and nonfiction as well. So when you're constructing a world, whether it's one you experienced yourself or one that you are attempting to recreate, like 1931 Bronx in New York City, how do you avoid cliches and make the research live? Michael, do you want to start?
Just sorry, thinking about the answer. I mean, the writing nonfiction, I'm not putting words into people's mouths. Like they're all sourced somewhere whenever I have a quote, and that makes it well. It's not that I avoid cliches; is that I'm not responsible for them. That was particularly fun in the writing about the 1920s, right, where there's all this jargon that we know, and slang that we know from the movies, it was there on the page. People actually said this stuff, and so it was a great way to really enrich the narrative that I was providing about this time. It's also, I can't, at writing nonfiction, there aren't really plot cliches, or at least the cliches that there are, again, they really happened. I just thinking, there was a great, as for an anecdote, just kind of relating that, there was a threatening letter that someone had sent to Judge Seabury, who was running this investigation of Tammany Hall, and it was just, I can't remember the exact words, but it was like pulled from a really bad gangster movie, this is the words that this gangster who was sending this note thought would scare the judge, just fascinating to hear people actually say that stuff.
I think for me, it's often the telling but maybe less than popularly known detail that helps. For instance, 1926, 1927, the Broadway season in New York City. Do you know how many plays premiered? There were 70 Broadway theaters, and 297 plays opened that season, which bespeaks an entirely different theater world than the one we live in now. So I think things like that, I love details like that, and I think you probably all look for them in your own ways, I would imagine. How did you deal with recreating the art world, the black market art world?
In terms of research, I did a lot of reading up on what kind of people were in that world. Who was pulling the pieces out of the temples and the churches, and who was smuggling, and who were the people that were actually selling them in a legit setting. So I did a lot of research for that, and then I made the rest up. That's the great part about writing fiction. But I wanted the framework, and I wanted that to anchor the story, and then the rest, I fictionalized and kind of used to create my story.
It's a most interesting approach you take, because let's say the husband, we view one way, and then in the course of the book, just as his wife does, we come to view him in a very different way, and then another twist on that. Yeah. And the art world underlies all that as well. So I thought it was very deftly handled.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Reese, how do you make it live? How do you make the research crackle?
Well, I think when I write any book, my aim is not to tell you about London in 1968. It's not to tell you about Venice in 3 different time periods. It's to make you think you're there. That's done by a lot of things. It's obviously done by the physical setting. It's by noticing small details there. You know, what is different? Like, for example, when I was in Venice, I opened the window the first morning very early, and what I heard was, I heard bells, and I heard the high screech of swallows, and I heard seagulls. And I thought, oh, it's a city of birds and bells. And then there was a honk, and a boat went below, and I said, oh, a city of bells and birds and boats. And that, you know, that's how the heroine sees this to start with. I think seeing things through the eyes of your character really brings things to life. You know, you're not telling something. And it's worked well for me if I have a character who is not part of a setting. You know, in the Rose Arbor, obviously, which is the book we're here for at the moment, my heroine has had a sheltered life in London, and then so when she's outside of London, she's very much the observer, because it's, especially when she goes to this abandoned village. The crux of this book is a village that was commissioned by the military in World War II, and the villagers were told they had 3 weeks to get out and leave. And then the army came in and destroyed it. And it's still there today, and it's still off limits unless they open it up once a month. So, I mean, that is such an iconic place that really carries the whole book. It's like a metaphor for the whole story, really.
And the towns were requisitioned and then used for, because they were on the coast,
Yeah,
they were used
yeah,
for...
invasion practice, yeah.
So basically they bombed the hell out of them.
They did.
To practice for Normandy.
Unfortunately, they told these poor people, you know, they said, you need to get out. And the people put a note on the church door saying, this has been our home for generations, please treat it kindly, not knowing that they were going to practice invasion with lime ammunition. So it's still there, and you can it's so haunting to go and see it with the remains of the buildings covered in ivy and a tree growing up through the middle of somebody's living room. You know, it's...
Is there more than one? Are there others of those?
There are 2 others. There's not another one on the coast. There's a couple inland that were requisitioned for various things too. But you know, in wartime, the army could just come and say, "We want your house. You have a week to leave." And there were lots of really lovely, stately homes that the army were in, and absolutely trashed them. So
and,
you know,
and lovely little communities destroyed.
Yeah. So you know, it's just it brings home what wartime was like on the home front as well as on the other front. Yeah.
Frank, how do you use the research to present a convincing, lifelike portrait of where you've been and what you've seen and what you've heard?
I really do try to give the reader a feel for what I'm experiencing in real time, and the devil is in the details there. I was sensitive to trying to avoid cliches to describe things, but I also address that by trying to offer the reader a cliche that might resonate with them. So I'm going to throw things out to the reader and hope that you'll grab one of them as your own. So for example, very simple example, I think in one sentence early in my book I describe long-haul truckers as part cowboy, part hermit, part fighter pilot. Okay, are those all cliches? Yes. Is one of them possibly going to resonate with you as we move through the book and I describe what it's like to sit in that rig at night, particularly riding above the highway, above it all? Yes. And then the details, you know, I'm with a complete stranger who miraculously has agreed to let me ride with him, and sharing a very confined space, sleeping in the sleeper berth. I got the upper bunk. And you know, there are things you don't think about a lot, but nature does call when you're thousands of miles on the road. And I do spend some time saying, you know, this is how that works, by the way. Here's how it works when you don't stop. Just to say, here's what this is really like inside that truck.
Katie, how you use the environment, language, setting to make it something that pops?
Well, I liked what Reese said about having it really come through your character's eyes. And I'm thinking of a scene early on in my book where my character is walking down the main street of their little town, and she finds herself looking at a newspaper displayed in a window, and it's the headline is about the hangings of the resulting from the Nuremberg trials. And I tried to, that kind of gets mentioned, periodically throughout the story. I sort of wanted that image kind of like hanging over the story. And then other things that came up in my research, like I found very like specific propaganda posters, like dealing with rationing and things like that. And I have Maple notice those as she's walking through town. So I think trying to sprinkle it in an authentic way where it's really part of the character's experience, and not just sort of like, well, like you said, Reese, not me telling you about 1946 Vermont, but letting you discover it through how Maple is going about her day.
Yeah. And there were other songs on the radio than "In the Mood." all the cliches that come up for that era. A couple of years ago, there was a book, I forget the name of the author, but it was called The War of Art. And it was a kind of a basic training book to get writers moving and working. And the author makes the claim that that a writer only needs 3 books. You have a limit of 3 books tops for research. Anything else you can fill in later. Which brings the question to mind, is there such a thing as too much research? What is enough research? When do you know you've got too much research, or not enough for that matter? Reese?
I don't think you ever know that you've got too much. The big problem is that you can't use 90% of the research you've got. You're going to use 10% of it, but the fact that you know the other 90% makes it more real and more valuable. But and the problem is, as you say, knowing when to stop. You think you're looking on the internet, especially like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know about that. And then 4 hours later, it's like, I probably should get back to writing now.
Have you experienced that, Kimberly?
Yeah, and I think, I talked before about going down rabbit holes, and it's really easy on the internet to go down lots of rabbit holes. But I want to write a story, and I want it to be authentic in the details, but really it's about the emotion of the story and the relationship between, my characters and how they respond to these things that are happening for them. So I do a lot of research, but then at one point I really kind of stop before I know everything. If there's something else I need to look up, I can always go back. But, the trick is like knowing what to leave in the story, but also knowing what to leave out of the story. And you leave a lot of facts out in fiction.
I could just add that I saw an occasion once of too much research. I was reading this book that was set in Elizabethan England, and a doctor was called out on a case. And as he was coming down the stairs, he couldn't help but think of the 30 Years' War. Because she had to talk about this, because she knew about it. And I thought, I have never come running down the stairs and stopped and went, oh my God, the 30 Years' War. And that's a case of, you can see this sometimes, a writer has said, I have done this research, and now you're bloody well going to get it whether you like it or not.
Katie, do you ever find yourself with too much material?
Yeah, sometimes I think a little voice inside my head will be like, hey, we should probably like write the story. You probably have enough information. And what I do sometimes to figure that out for myself is I like journal to myself. I like write to myself in a notebook by hand. And then that usually, for whatever reason, that jogs my brain or helps me get back on track. And then that sort of helps me cycle back into drafting. And then you can always go back and fill in the pieces later. Sometimes what I do to stop myself getting too sidetracked is if there's a detail that I don't know, like how much an average mortgage payment would have been at the time when my character is, experiencing some money troubles. I'll just put put a blank. I tend to draft in Google Docs, and I'll put a comment to myself saying, find out how much mortgage payments were and come back to this later, things like that. So I think initially in early drafts I would get too bogged down in getting everything right the first time, and I realized I need to focus more on getting the story right and then going back and plugging in stuff afterwards.
Michael, too much research, too little research?
Well, I research in 2 stages. I do, before I start really writing, I do kind of broad research. And I think I do kind of rely on like 3 significant texts about the subject matter, or around 3 or 4, sure. To get a sense of it. And then as I write each chapter, I kind of bury down into it and do a lot more detailed research that allows me to sort of tell that story and with all the narrative detail that I can muster and that I can pull from the research. I don't think there's writing nonfiction. I don't think there's too much research, but I think there are, you have these decisions. There's a tension between the history and the narrative that you have with nonfiction, and you don't want to gloss over anything in the history. You don't want to get anything wrong. A lot of things that you're writing about. There are a lot of details that can get tedious to present to readers. So it's sort of finding that line, making sure that you don't get everything wrong, making sure you get to the heart of the history without trying to present too much detail to the reader.
How do you feel about that, Frank? Just same way, or with the?
Yeah, I think closely related to the question of too much research is whether or not you've strayed from what your intent is for the book. So I intended to write a book about 3 subcultures: long-haul truckers, sex-trafficked victims, and crime analysts who try to connect the dots to stop the next killing. Well, I was happy to include extensive research about pimp culture, which I spent a lot of time on, and my editor correctly said, this is not about any of those subcultures, is it? It's about another subculture. It's about pimps. So, as a famous sculptor once said, when asked how do you carve this figure of a man, I carve away everything that doesn't look like a man. So, if you're including too much, it's not what you're trying to get to, right? And the other thing with too much research is these days this increasing phenomenon of everybody's got a blog and a chat room and a podcast. And so you can literally go down wormholes forever on someone saying something once on a podcast or in a blog. And they might be right, but trying to verify that is craziness. And so that has to fall by the
You
wayside.
drive yourself nuts trying to do that. So one quick question before we open up for any questions in the audience. You mentioned, I think, Michael, you mentioned time travel earlier. Let me ask you quickly, if you could go back to research one era via the magic of time travel, what era, what period of time would it be? Kimberly?
I like showers too much and air conditioning. I don't know about going back in time.
You still stay in the present?
I want to stay in the present. If I were going to go back in time, it would be for personal reasons. I would go back and I don't know, maybe meet my grandparents as kids or something fun like that. But my stories are set in contemporary time, so I'm just going to stay right here.
All right. Reese?
Well, my stories have all been set in either the first half of the 20th century, well, up to 1968. So it's interesting. Some of you in this audience do class as historical now because 1968 is now a historical novel. You'll be pleased to know. No, I mean, I'm very. You have to realize the downsides of any time. It might be kind of fun to go back to Jane Austen's England and meet the Bennets, etc. But then you realize that if someone got sick and there was no penicillin, they'd die. So, I think we're very happy where we are.
Yeah. Frank? Any particular?
As someone who values the law and the Constitution, I'd love to go back to with the Founding Fathers.
Oh, boy, yeah.
And I've got a few questions to ask.
I know some people you could take with you.
And I think they would ask us, you mean you haven't written anything new?
Katie?
I agree with Kimberly about showers and air conditioning and things like that. But if I had the chance to go back for a day, I mean, I don't know. It's just so hard to pick. I don't have a one specific answer, except that the only thought I had was I never got to meet either of my grandfathers. And so on a personal level, I would like to go meet, maybe get a chance to meet them.
So my books have all take place in the last 150 years, I'd say, and the reason for that is simply because those, you go back farther than that, and you can't find the detailed information to write, compelling narrative. So I would like to go way past, back, deep in time to where we have, only the fragments of information, whether so ancient Greece or Egypt or China, and see what that world was like.
Excellent. Maybe one quick question, someone? Oh, are we done? I guess, I'm sorry. If you have questions, you can ask them now, now that we're done. Let me thank our panelists. Let me thank you. Let me thank Marjorie Flax and Christine Monty for making this all happen. And there we are.